Good evening, viewers at home. Today, I'll be hosting the Reparations Now program. I'm Elton McCrae, and this program is a special program honoring the village movement. Today, 8th of May, is the 178th anniversary of the Beterverwagting and Triumph community. So, we've decided at Guyana Reparations Committee to host the program to honor the village movement in collaboration with the Beterverwagting and Triumph 8th of May movement. With me to take this program will be Dr. Henry Jeffrey and Alvin Montague. Right? We will be looking at the role the village movement has played towards the development of modern day Guyana, what access to facilities were created by the Africans in these villages, and how it benefited others along the way. We will also be looking at some of the causes which may have caused the village movement to lose impetus, and some rationale for it to have some rationale whereby we can change that situation for the village movement. But first, I would like Dr. Jeffrey to probably tell us what he considers were the motive that drove the village movement, why our ancestors went towards in that direction.
Thank you very much, Elton. I think that the whole question of ownership is very much tied up with the notion of slavery. I mean, when you think of slavery was the disowning of the person of himself, or let me explain this to you. What makes man unique is essentially the fact that he can sell himself. The human being, so far as I know, is the only creature that can actually sell himself or part of it. He can sell his labor, he can do all sorts of things. So he can sell himself. He owns himself and he can sell himself. So when you have slavery, he's totally unfree. He has no capacity to do that as an individual. No human being has. Once you're in a context of slavery, you are just part of someone owning you, but your nature is to own yourself and be able to universalize that owning to do what you feel with yourself. So I believe that to the village, once slavery was gone and you were able to take back that, it is part of a psychological process, and that itself is important. At a more practical level, of course, once slavery ended, sooner or later, the plantation owners would have turned up and said, you got to pay rent. Because remember, you are living more or less free because you're providing labor to the plantation. But slavery, 1834, by 1838, apprenticeship system would have ended, and you would have had the plantation owners were already using all kind of means to prevent you from making a go of your surroundings, so to speak. Therefore, they would have come and tell you sooner or later that you had to pay rent.
Okay.
Right.
Yes, so
once they said that, once you knew that, you had to get into the situation of actually saying, I have to own some land, I have to own myself. The psychological and economic processes come together.
Yes, so we see the movement towards the villages as one of ownership in the first instance. Now, Brother Alvin Montague, you are here, and we recognize you as a cultural activist. What do you consider were the cultural pillars of the village movement?
Well, thank you for having me here tonight. Greetings to the family out there. And it's a privilege to be here on the 8th of May to represent or to be part of the May 8th celebration of the Beterverwagting village anniversary. And with the intent of answering the question, I would kind of piggyback off of what Dr. Jeffrey is saying in terms of control. And in terms of the pillars of the village movement, once one becomes free, or they intend to become free, the whole process is for one to be taking control of one's destiny, right? And in controlling one's destiny, you have the impetus to navigate, and as well as to be in a position to create your own systems, your own laws based on your cultural identity. So I'm thinking that in the process of us creating the village movement, it gave us that necessary direction in where we can be able to control our destiny, control the destiny of our children or of our grandchildren, and thereby having this control that was over us by the colonial powers. And it's interesting because when we look at, from the time Africans came to this continent or to this country in 1634, just around there, to when slavery was abolished, we're looking at between just around 180 to 200 years, right? And what I'm looking at is that that means we are like 2 or 3 generations removed from our actual culture. So with the village movement, it was definitely important, because the longer we take to have that control of ourselves, the worse it became for us to have access to our culture. So the village movement played an important role in making sure that at least what was left of the culture was still intact in a particular way. But now when we look at it 178 years hence, we are seeing that the degeneration of our culture. And so to get directly to the process of the village movement, we are saying that if we as a people do not honor the village movement in the sense that honoring what was the reason that our ancestors went about this process, we're going to be losing everything that they fought for.
Yes,
you know?
I fully support that. So, hence we have, right now in the village, we have what is being a report, so to say, of the 8th of May movement,
yeah,
where our, especially driven by some young people, very young people,
yes,
you know, the leadership generally is below 35 in that group. They felt the need to see that they want to make back that link, which was initiated 178 years ago on the 8th of May. So the group is called 8th of May. You know, it had its genesis from gaffes, as we would say, on a popular bridge in the community. Once belongs to a fellow we call Pipey Laurie. His son Favy MacDonald and his crew were gaffing, and they felt that we need to have an 8th of May movement, and we had people like Teacher Jean Cadogan and the others came on board, and that movement was initiated. Today in the village we have the district councils led by the 8th of May, right? But the leadership is not the elders in the council really. The group that is pushing this anniversary is some young people, and they definitely are trying to make that nexus that you spoke of. Now to Dr. Jeffrey. We know from history books that most of our communities, the initial communities that were plantations that were bought in a cooperative mode. So we had Victoria was a cooperative, BV was a cooperative. Down the line, that was not so. Can you say why our people would have sought the cooperative as their vehicle towards ownership of the lands?
Well, I think if you look, it's not only our people. I think if you look at other people's too, you will see that they operated collectively to do these kinds of large-scale purchasing and business. And up to the day, we have joint stock companies are essentially a way of people coming together to do this sort of a thing. But the cooperative was done large because people are poor and they want to get together. They want to buy these lands. They can't do it alone. It was a necessity. You can't do it alone. I mean, we can look back, and if we want to rationalize, we can say, look, it come from African villages, Ujama, in a thing, and you can go through that if you wish. But there's no individual that could have done it alone. So once they decided that they want the freedom, once they decided that freedom means that they should own these villages rather than the plantation owners coming later and say, you got to pay rent now that slavery is over, that they had to get together. It was a necessity. They had no choice.
They had no choice.
They had absolutely no choice.
So you're saying, Dr. Jeffrey, that the co-op, it's inherent quality of the human being or human society.
Once you want to get in large-scale projects of anything, I don't care if you're, even today, I mean, you would call we have gone the road of making joint stock companies. We give them their own legal personalities now, but because of the problems involved in having so many people together. But it is an attempt to do big things with a lot of people with limited resources. So we do it, and at that time, they did it. They had to come together to get that $50,000, $52,000 in BV or whichever to buy the village. It was simple as that. No one person could have done it. So they did it.
Well, they could have done it and partitioned the village.
Well, no, you see, your question was why they came together to get the village. I'm saying that is a fundamental.
They operated the community as a cooperative thereafter.
Well, yes, but it was a cooperative with a sort of a difference because people still, they never really partitioned it, but you still had, as far as I know, maybe you know differently, you still have access to given parts of it that you could utilize for your benefit.
Yes.
So it was right. So I mean, yes, it wasn't sold off, and maybe they did that too to prevent the selling off in a sense. Because if you had given me my own ownership, my Henry Jeffrey's part in some sort of legal documentation, you know, Henry Jeffrey will go off and sell his, and the next thing you know. So effectively, so that would have been given, of course, that the legal apparatus for doing so existed then. I'm not even so certain that it existed in those kind of communities at that point of time. Later it became so, and they did sell off.
They did sell off, right. We recognize that because of the individualized. In fact, some of our communities were made into proprietary villages. And the cooperatives were not encouraged, even in those that tried to maintain that structure, where the purchasers were single, like in the case of Litchfield, Kojo Macpherson, and even Triumph itself, where the people wanted to buy, but they refused. They sold it to one man, who then shared it up.
But that's only because the government get in and try to stop them from buying it in the first place, because the man who owned it was selling it to them, to the BV people.
Right, they were.
And essentially they were going to sell it for what he wanted 48. They said he can get 20. They said I can make 24 at this point of time, and later over 4 or 5 years we're going to pay the rest. And the government itself got in its one, and then suddenly they went to court with the government with the help of a newspaper arrangement, some newspaper proprietor at that time, and suddenly the files lost in the court. It's not a modern thing.
Yes.
We're going around the sun again.
Yes, people lobbying for rights. Yes, now to continue within the tradition of our culture, how do you see the village movement, or how do you see the village movement being impacted on by the African culture that came from Africa? Because you said some of our people would have been removed, but then they were recent arrivals. So that
as well. Yeah. Well, the impact of the village movement on the culture. The culture on the village movement. The culture on the village movement, exactly. the impact of the culture and the village movement, when we look at it, we see, for example, as myself growing up in BV as a young child, I think some of the things we look at that in our community were there was a form of ethical conscience, right? Whereby you were, if you were trying to do something that was out of line, you had to think twice or three times because you always some kind of eyes you think looking at you. Even on the street where I grew up, Simpson Street, you had Teacher Ernie, Teacher Cinti, and these different people. So for some reason, you had something telling you, if I do something, there's some kind of repairment I have to go through in terms of doing what I'm doing. So this ethical conscience is like, to me, it's not as impactful as it is today. However, there were certain pillars in our community, like education, right? You come home from primary school, you had to go to lessons. Education was a major factor in our village, right? And you find that, for example, Mr. Henry Jeffrey probably is a recipient of these foundation, or like Teacher Ivy and these different people who were doing lessons. So education for me was one of the main factors that came out of our culture. And not just the concept of education, is what you can do with education, right? So when we look at the impact of our culture, and as I want to go back to what I said before, right? Although you mentioned recent arrivals, right? We were as well 2 and 3 generations removed from the original culture. And I would like to give a kind of broader definition of what culture represents. Because within culture, you have certain paradigms within culture. Language, right? There's something we don't have. That wasn't there, right? Or religion. We don't have that today, right? Or folk tales. When we used to grow up, we used to hear Bear Nancy stories. Those are part of our tradition. Now, within these Nancy stories, within came this moral ethic within the Nancy stories that, you know, although Bear Nancy was a smart guy, and you don't expect a spider to be speaking, but the stories that were told by our older folks within our homes and within our communities, we had this kind of feeling that the stories that were told, it had a moral fabric within it to tell you there was something other than the story that was being told, even as a child, right? And when you grow older, you understand, you know, I understand my grandmother's telling me, right? So these things, although we had recipients of the culture, there wasn't a full aspect of African culture. And in my understanding, or my looking at it today, if we say, okay, we want to go back to what our ancestors did, but I want to even go back further in terms of what we can do as culture. Another thing that is inherent within culture is architecture. I'll give you a classic example. If you drive around Guyana today, you don't have no representation of African architecture. You have representation of Indian architecture, Amerindian architecture, Chinese architecture, but there's no representation of African culture, of African architecture. This is something that is part of culture. One other aspect, which is the most important driving force of culture, is religion. Religion is the most powerful driving force. You can be, for example, you can have a Hindu brother with the name Muhammad. You can have a Chinese brother who is practicing his Chinese religion and having the name Paul. But when you look at African culture, you are looking at, we as brothers and sisters, we got, like you're saying, Alvin Montague, right? So if you just see the name without seeing the person, you don't know if it's black or white or whatever. So I'm saying in African culture, if we want to bring forward or bring back our real African culture, we have to go back even past the village movement in terms of what our ancestors did at that point. You know, so that would be my impetus in terms of if we want to go on this particular journey that we call it village movement. And when we talk about the village movement, where are we moving to? What is our end goal? What is the end game? Right? And so that would be my part in terms of being part of this whole process of re-evaluating and reinvigorating the village movement, is for us to really take on African in its holistic format. When we talk about education, I can remember when I was in primary school, we had little books teaching about Timbuktu and Mali and the Congo, but there was no deep essence of what African culture is really about. We have no concept of Ma'at or Ubuntu. So I'm saying now, we have, in this present day and time, we have these processes that can be very helpful in terms of pushing us even further than where we were and where we are today. And I hope that answers the question.
Yes, you've certainly done that. Now, in terms of the relationship that existed in our communities, you know, we saw back then, for instance, when BV was bought and they had the first village council, we saw that there were women who participated in that election. Even when Victoria was born, there were 5 women involved. And in the BV case of the village council, the women had the voting right, which was long before women had the voting right in this country. What could have been the reason why we wanted to do something different as a people?
You know, it is said that BV has had the force like village council. Somewhere else in Trinidad, I was told today, but I always thought. And it was held around 1852, somewhere, when they were attempting to choose the council. But the woman didn't have the right to vote. There was a single woman there,
yeah,
but she didn't have the right to vote. Not at all. And I mean, I'm not saying in any way that she was a slouch or nothing like that in the situation. But certainly she didn't have the right to vote. But the women were, as they are today, even today in African political activity, they are the driving force. They have been so all the time. Even after the announcement that slavery would have ended, and the villages believed that slavery would have ended, it was the women who were on the streets making most of the noise that slavery has ended and there should be no apprenticeship and all that sort of thing. Is the women, and throughout they've been driving the political thing in Guyana. But you see, as you said just now about culture, the question is that you are living in a broader society than, well, a bigger one, a bigger society. When I think of culture, I think of it as the norms, values, and beliefs of a people. It's by what we live.
Agree. Yeah,
right?
Agree.
And therefore, but when you say what has happened there, is that you live in a wider society. You will inculcate a lot of what the wider society does. It depends on how much power you have. If you're tremendously powerful, you will no doubt get your way. If you are not, and you don't have that level of power, you will more or less be subservient, regardless of how much you quarrel with this. You'll operate at a more subservient level. And therefore, I believe that when we talk about these things, we must also accept the level at where we were. I mean, and the dominant culture will pervade.
Right. Okay.
And that occurred. It's not something that necessarily we want. It's not, in many cases, certainly might not even what the women in the other part of the culture wanted, but the men were of that dominant culture were the rulers, and that's what occurred. I don't think it's anything particularly specific that led to this, to treating women in that way. It was what the dominant culture did, and we were subservient in that dominant culture.
Okay, so you're saying that the dominant culture was all pervasive. That might be so. Now, back to our village movement, though. Alvin mentioned something about the women and their vigilance, or not necessarily the women only, but the wider society's vigilance. In fact, some authors will say that the village movement was built on 4 pillars. Education, as Alvin mentioned, the need to provide a home, as you did mention, where he needed his own home. The African needed his own home, so he had his home, he had his education, established educational facilities for his children. He looked at his spiritual needs, the church, and a place to work. That's where we had our backlands. But then others came into our communities, yet we did not say to them, look, we have built this for ourselves. Why do you think that we had allowed such a happening? Because we know even today, we go to some communities, we are debarred from the privileges of benefit. Well, how come our foreparents allowed?
That's an interesting question, and I could answer it in a couple of ways. However, it kind of is an African way. We are kind of benevolent people, and there are times when, for example, in the culture of Egypt, they kept foreigners out. They considered the Greeks childish mathematicians. That was their thing when it comes to Greeks, and they kept them out. But over time, they kept coming and they kept coming, right? So over time, they allowed them to come in, and that caused the degeneration of the society over time, right? So I'm not sure what caused them to do that, but it could be several different circumstances that created our foreparents to allow other people to come into the village because of maybe different needs, because they could be running from something. It could be several different reasons. What my thing would be is that based on the people that came into the village, are we better off or are we worse off due to these people coming into the village? And if so, how can that be corralled? Because I don't think we are in a position right now, based on how our society is governed, for us to like stop people from coming in.
No.
You know, I'm not saying we should. I don't think we could structure anything like that because our society is a bit varied, right? However, in the terms of people coming into the village, there are people who came into the village and were an asset, and there are other people who came into the village who were liabilities, right? So we got to choose our poison in terms of why, and you know, were we the beneficiary overall based on these people coming into the village or not?
All right. I mean, you started by saying that there are four pillars: were education, housing,
agriculture, spiritual religion. Yeah.
But you want to show me which people at that level don't have them same four pillars?
No, but we didn't.
No. Because you are specifying.
Yes.
I think almost everybody here at that level of development have those four pillars.
Mm-hmm.
That's not specific to Africans.
Food, clothing, shelter.
Yes. And religion.
And religion.
Show me one other group. There's not a driver for Africans alone.
No, I'm not saying it's a driver,
but why should other people coming if they're like you and have those same drivers?
No, but they came to benefit from our education system. They came to benefit from our lands.
Yeah, but it's lands. They have the same thing.
Needs.
The same needs, the same aspirations, assuming. Why shouldn't they be there? They're not. You see, it seems to me that you're making too much of what you want to call these four pillars. Because I believe all poor people, for the most part, at that level, at time, particularly had those four pillars. Mm-hmm. That was their thing.
Yeah, but on the other hand, Dr. Jeffrey, if you remember, or when the Portuguese came into our villages,
yes,
we were producing, let's say, BV, for instance.
Yeah.
We were producing plantains.
Yeah.
We could not have sold our plantains directly to the plantation in LBI or Moripo,
yeah,
where they still had indentured laborers who they had to feed the plantations, and we were forced to sell our produce to the Portuguese. So the presence of these outsiders were not necessarily
an asset.
But
an asset to us.
Yes, but it's not the outsiders. It's the structure of governance that led to that happening. The outside corner the political leaders and say, we want this corner, so you mustn't buy from it. And the political people at that time allowed that to happen. It is, if the political leaders said, no, we're going to still buy from the thing, there wasn't discrimination. They were directly discriminating against you and therefore focus on what they did. It was the political leaders who discriminated against you. It was not to do with the Portuguese. The Portuguese came, they would have operated in a normal way if they couldn't corner some leader some way and say, I want an advantage. And because of the structure of government, he gave them the advantage. It is not the Portuguese themselves that's necessarily different from anybody or anything like that. It is that they cornered the political elite at the time who gave them certain advantage over you and discriminated against you. Perhaps because the Portuguese look more like them. It was a direct effort to not necessarily to impoverish you, but certainly to improve the conditions of that group.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. It's got nothing with 4 pillars or 5 pillars.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, Dr. Jeffrey, is our people even though in some communities they objected, other communities just accepted the presence and let life go on.
You think your forefathers actually sat down and see this happening and didn't object? They did object. They didn't have the power to change it. They didn't have the power to change
Some
it.
communities went to court.
Well, exactly.
Like Nabacalis, for
exactly.
instance.
And yet
Right.
it still it went on. The files might have been lost there again because the political elite at that time wanted it to happen. I wouldn't blame the Portuguese as such. I certainly blame the political elite who wanted a buffer between you and them and believe the Portuguese can create that buffer and favor them.
So then, do you think there should be some redress today, even though it was time removed? Because the Portuguese in Guyana definitely had an advantage then, which they made good use of. So we Africans, we are talking reparations today. Should there be something which should give us an edge in some aspects?
All societies, all civilized societies, should try to equalize the conditions of its people. It ain't got nothing to do with not even doubt what you are talking about it. It is not good for one group of people, particularly if they are identifiable, to go about seeing other people seeing that they have tremendous advantage. It doesn't work good for this society.
It doesn't work
good. So every society has a right, modern day society, has a right to try to mend that balance and try to bring people closer together economically, finance. Today, look what's happening in the world. You got a couple billionaires can control the whole world. I mean, the whole world. That can't work. We shouldn't ever sit down, regardless of who they are. And everybody knows that now, and everybody's saying, no, this gotta change. And therefore, similarly, our governments, they can talk as much as they like, you have to put things in place to see that people have equal rights, equal opportunities to fulfill their destinies, to fulfill their capacities.
So then you're actually saying the quest of reparation is a just quest.
The quest for equality is a just quest. I am saying reparation is a different story. You're claiming that people have done X and done Y. I'm saying that our governments, don't worry, Britain, yes, we shall fight Britain and get reparation, great. But the government standing at the day in our society has a right to try to make that happen.
Yeah, well, we will be approaching this government, whichever is the government.
I don't care which government. I'm just saying that is the duty of the government.
For our reparations also, because we're looking for lands in Ghana.
The government right now, and the government before, I think, also say, yeah, we can fight, we can speak, we'll support you in terms of Britain and all of that. The question is not only Britain, what you're doing right here, that people are right here. You deal with these issues. Look at the African land issue. I mean, they're tying it up with all sort of people. Deal with the issue here. There are certain things, ancestral lands you call it, and let's deal with it. Let's sort it out. Here, you are government here. Maybe it can't be done by, given the nature of our society, it cannot be done by any one government.
It's a process.
But certainly we got to have a national consensus that this should be sorted.
So we are saying we should actually have decisions made through Parliament and to...
Whatsoever. We need some national consensus. And we going, so when one government changes, the other won't come.
It must be respected.
The whole thing
it must be respected. Okay, back to the village movement. We have Buxton will soon be celebrating their 178th anniversary, and we recognize today that most of our villages are in disarray from the economic standpoint, from the cultural standpoint. Are there any possible remedies that you would like to recommend towards alleviating those situations?
Well, go on.
Okay. I would like, from my observation, it has to be like a three-tier process, right? Long-term, mid-term, short-term, right? In the long-term process, it has to be starting from in the schools. the knowledge in the schools. For example, when I was in school, nothing in school told us about the May 8 movement. Not the May 8 movement, but the village being bought at that time. Nothing was said in school. So I'm saying as a long-term process, we need to get that aspect within the school system. Within our village, we should have control over that within our own village, where we can have access to the curriculum of what's going on in the education of our children, right? So the long-term process should be that these kids are getting this knowledge and understanding of the village, what our ancestors went through to arrive at this particular point. The midterm process should be engaging certain pillars within our community to be able to have like not necessarily a global understanding, but a wide village understanding of what we're going through as a people. For example, it was last year when we were having, even this year, when President Granger was in the village. Look at the people who showed up, right? Because the knowledge of our village is not prevalent, right? So we're looking at processes whereby we need to use in the pillars that you mentioned. For example, when we speak about food or feeding ourselves. Back in the day, we had agriculture, everyone had a vegetable garden we were planting. We don't plant now as before. So we need to come up with strategies how we can start reinvigorating our villages, not just BV, but our villages, to move towards a particular point. That's why I was asking the question, the village movement, where are we moving to? What's the goal? It's just like a country or a nation. What is the goal of the country as a nation? Is the whole country understand where we are moving towards, or is just the government? In terms of the villages, it's just the administration know where we're going and not the village. So for us to be successful in anything that we're endeavoring to do, it has to be a holistic move towards it. You know what I mean? So education, feeding ourselves, housing ourselves, these are the main things that can help to reinvigorate this village movement, and we have to have a sense of ownership. If you don't have a sense of ownership, for example, if I'm living in my community, I'm cleaning just my area, and the two neighbors next to me are not cleaning. Yours is just a distinction, but the neighborhood is dirty. So if you don't have a sense of ownership, and if everyone is not taking a personal responsibility towards bringing their villages towards a particular place, we're going to end up in the same place we are, probably even worse.
Well, when I think of the village movement, Alton, I always not think of, well, maybe it's me, I don't think of a modern thing. You understand? I see it as a movement that has been historical, in the sense that there was an enthusiasm with people those persons that have just been given freedom to own things, and it drove them to buy land and all of that. But then it fizzled after that.
So it's lacking.
Yes, it fizzled. I mean, movements don't have to live forever. When I talk about the movement, I'm talking about the historical artifact that existed to give people a sense of belonging, of ownership and livelihood and all of that. I'm not talking about something that necessarily, unless somebody proves me differently, that's something necessarily we want to relive. No. What we want to revive are the villages as a modern economy. That's a different story in my
yeah, I would agree.
That is what we are talking about.
That's what we are talking about, reviving the villages as a modern economy. Now, how do you do that?
How about doing that?
Now, that is the question for us here. And there are numerous factors. One is, we talk about agriculture, say that is one of the pillars. Well, the way we left lands for all of our parents, because we want to be equal, let's give Elton a piece down here, give this one, the family properties, you can't even bring them together in modern way to help develop, get money, go for loans and all of that. It caused tremendous problems. In Britain, the system was left everything to the elder child for the most part. Give the others the part and let it go away. So the elder child got almost total control, and he developed the property and move on. Here, family property. I have family property. I mean, I have sometimes I think when I sit down, how much lands we are supposed to have, yet you can't get the family together to deal with them. The legal framework is so terrible. Even behind, the lands at BV at the back. When you talk about agriculture, tell me what are the structural and legal implications of all of that. You should know that more than me, but I only sit down at the shop, at the corner shop, and I can hear the quarrels that who and what is too far from the other. Those things have to be sorted.
Yes, I agree. And in fact, if you mentioned the land, now those lands, what we are doing right now, a large portion of it remains village lands. Those were crown lands which the villagers had, and at least to villagers. So those lands we are now moving towards having them cooperativized. So we'll establish a co-op to control those lands for the benefit of the villagers. The lands that are owned by families, we are hoping that those families can come together and maybe form a co-op within themselves and to farm those lands.
Or to lease it.
Lease it to the co-op.
Or lease it to somebody. Because, you see, these things come...
Right.
Somebody got to put these things don't want people.
They chop up so much
right.
You know, a man ends up with a 5x5.
Exactly.
Can he go? Is it economical to plan that? So, a 1/10 of an acre. It's not economical.
Right.
So you have.
So we need to bring these lands together and work.
And you have to also recognize what's happened in the modern context. In the modern context, farming. A lot of people don't want to do farming. Let me put it like that. Yeah, and therefore, when I go, for instance, to BV and I look there, and I've been going there all the time. You know, you see me at the corner there forever. And it has always appeared to me that they got too many people without skills. None whatsoever. I started this thing called the basic competency and certificate program, and I put it, the first place I put it was at BV.
Yes, we did that. We did that. And but I remember where we had these people where we were trying to establish the after school business with those out of school youths.
Because schooling,
but it was abandoned.
Yes, but it was abandoned largely because people, if you are running the education ministry, people tend to think that means talking about people in schools and universities.
Yeah.
What happened to the thousands of people on the streets that are not qualified in anything? The education ministry has a responsibility to them. They are putting them out every year. 18,000 children are about born.
13,000.
In a year, about 18. But what comes out of the school system might be about 13,000. What comes out with a useful qualification must be about 8,000-9,000.
5,000 comes out
with marketable qualification. So what happened to the other 13,000? They are on the streets, they steal, they're going to do all that. And the education system seems to want to believe that it's only the schools that they're concerned about. A major concern must be these people, and governments must realize it's not just setting up two technical institutes over and there. This can be a widespread thing to give people a marketable qualification. It can happen. We set it up. It could happen, but then it was abandoned because it's not part of the modus operandi of the education system of ministry as such. You're out of school, we more or less finished with you, you gone. But it's you causing chaos on the streets. It's there that put you
end up in Camp Street.
Right. Well, I don't know.
Anyhow, so we have to deal with the future of our villages, and we need to really get back some sort of training institutions to cater for those young people. We need to establish, as we're moving in BV towards re-establishing our farms. The farm is not just the end of it all. We need to establish industries based on those farms. And to have those industries, we'll need people trained, right? So we need to market our produce. So it's a very complex situation, and we are not really geared to complete that process.
But you gotta get the government to do it. You see, you alone can't do this. You got hundreds of people now in BV, a lot of communities.
BV, Buxton,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, now in the African village, all sorts of villages got people hanging. The truth is that you have to have a comprehensive program to deal with out of school
Long-term.
youths in a long term. And not only youths, anybody that want to be trained. Anybody, because that want to be trained, that have no
continuing
You can have a man who
continue.
finish, who retired.
Right.
Because
right.
now I have a fellow, he's got a bachelor's in accounts, retired. He's cutting metal with an hacksaw and grinding. Because that's what there's nobody he's going to call him and say, man, come do me books. And these kind of
Yeah.
things.
So essentially, that is a central area, because it is important, because people don't have to stay in Ghana. One time when I was minister, I went to Linden for something, and somebody says, all right, and someone says, but you don't have jobs in Ghana. I said, let me tell you something. As government, yes, the government should try to provide jobs. But you see, my concern as a minister of education is to give you the capacity for the world of work anywhere.
Marketable, to be marketable.
Anywhere.
Exactly.
And that anywhere. So you can sit there and say, I'm not going to school because they're in government and give you a job. That is not my focus. My focus is to make you marketable, so you can go to Timbuktu and get a job. That is what I want to happen. Yes, I'm part of a government. I know that is the government's responsibility, and the government should be doing that, but that don't make that stop you. You don't have to stay here. If you get qualified,
right.
you can go to
You don't even
Trinidad,
have to
you can go anywhere.
You can create your own employment.
Of course.
And that's a
course.
big focus we should be looking at, especially in our villages, because we all know when we were growing up, we had a tinsmith, we had a tailor, we had the butcher, we had the carpenter, all within the village.
Yes, you can have all those things.
But today, you cannot find contractors easily in most of our villages. You cannot find most of the trades. Mechanics, you have to go elsewhere.
I think something that's been missing from the landscape is like trade schools, not essentially trade schools, but people used to go to Pleasance, even in BVI, you can go and get like a mentor to teach you welding, to teach you carpentry, and that is where it's missing. Apprenticeship, right. So some things like that need to be revived.
And it's still there. It's still there. Board of Industrial Training is still there to do that, but it can't do it in a widespread enough fashion. And that is the problem. It's not doing it so widespread enough.
In closing, we have just about 2 minutes. So if you give her 1 minute and 1 minute, and before we leave the people's homes.
Well, I think I've said most of what I want to say. I just think that effectively that we need to focus on trying to make these villages modern economies. How we do that, nobody has put out a paper how that happened. I've not seen a paper that says. I've seen the thing about the African, the year of African descent and all the things and all the things they have asked for and all of that. But that's general. It's like the National Development Strategy in Ghana. It's general. What you gotta every village would have its own specific problem, although they might look similar. Some people got to sit down there and work up a program, a long-term, medium-term program to make them modern economies with all that.
I would add that culture is so critical and important. If you're looking at the Guyanese landscape, every aspect of Guyanese culture, I'm talking about these different communities, Indian, Portuguese, and we're the ones who are behind. And I think the main reason that we are behind because we're not fully engaged in our concept of who we are ethnically. You know what I'm saying? So thinking that culture plays a critical role in terms of where the villages are going to be going forward. And one thing I would advocate is for chartered schools dealing with the concept of African culture. That would be one addition, and as Minister of Education, there's a driving move in different countries for African-centered education. It's not to distinct yourself from others, but because of the African ethnic group is a very specific and unique kind of group. And they need to have access to their culture because we're growing up and we're engaging in everyone else's cultures except ours. So I think our culture needs to be at the forefront of anything that we're going to be doing.
Thank you, Alvin.
Yeah.
And with that, I'll say good night and thank you for welcoming us into your homes. And on behalf of the Guyana Reparations Committee and the BV 8 of May movement, I say thanks once more. Good evening. Good night.